The scent of damp earth and jasmine was my first memory, a fragrant anchor in the vast, silent space of the orphanage. While other children clung to teddy bears, I clung to the tiny, determined shoots in the courtyard garden. I learned early that love wasn't always a given, but it was something you could cultivate. You could pour care into something, nurture it, and with patience and the right conditions it would bloom. I suppose that's why I fell so completely for Kalen. I met him in college, a stark contrast to my quiet world of petals and roots. He was a force of nature, a storm of ambition and intensity. I was studying botany, he was a business and finance prodigy. Our worlds collided in a required humanities class. He was arguing a point about market fluctuations with such passion that the professor was left speechless. I was sitting behind him, sketching a lily in the margin of my notebook. After class he turned to me, his dark eyes sharp. "You didn't say a word for 2 hours. Either you're a genius or you're bored." "I'm listening," I'd said simply. "It's how I learn. By observing." A slow smile spread across his face. "Observing. I like that." That was it. I was a sunflower and he was my sun. I oriented my entire existence towards his light. I learned that he carried an old, quiet heartache. A girl named Serafina who had been his first love, his what if. She was a ballet dancer who had left for Europe, and a part of him I knew had never moved on. But I was arrogant in my love. I believed my constant, steady devotion could override a ghost. After graduation, as he launched his tech startup Ether Innovations, it was the most natural thing in the world for me to become his assistant. Who knew his coffee order? Black, 1 sugar, only when he was past 10 p.m. His allergy to shellfish, his tells when he was bluffing in a negotiation better than I did. I moved into his sleek, modern apartment, a space of glass and steel that felt nothing like a home. I filled it with pots of lavender, peace lilies and trailing ivy, my small attempts to root us there. For 5 years I was his right hand, his shadow, his foundation. I managed his chaotic schedule, prepped his presentations, and remembered his mother's birthday when he forgot. And I took care of him. I packed his lunches because he'd skip meals, and I attended every brutal business dinner. One such dinner 2 years in was with a group of investors from Shanghai. They loved Baiju and they loved to toast. Kalen, already stressed and running on fumes, was turning pale after the 3rd round. "Mr. Chin," I said, my voice calm but firm, interjecting smoothly into the conversation. "Kalen has been singing the praises of your foresight. He's a man of big ideas, but I'm the one who handles the details that make them reality. A toast to the architects of the future and the hands that build it." I lifted my glass, a charming smile on my face. Mr. Chin beamed and the focus shifted to me. I drank. Glass after glass, the fiery liquid burning a path down my throat. I kept my composure, laughing at jokes, steering the conversation, all while my insides felt like they were being scoured. I could feel Kalen's gaze on me, a mix of relief and something unreadable. Later, in the taxi, I slumped against the window, my forehead cool against the glass. A sharp, twisting pain coiled in my stomach. I clenched my jaw, breathing through it. "You didn't have to do that," Kalen said, his voice low. "Yes, I did," I whispered, my eyes closed. "You were fading. They needed to see strength. You closed the deal on Monday. They respect you and now they pity you a little less for having a lightweight for a CEO." He was quiet for a moment. Then his hand covered mine. It was warm, solid. "Thank you, Alara." The pain in my stomach was a small price to pay for that touch, for those words. That was the pattern. My devotion was the soil, and his occasional fleeting gratitude was the rain. I told myself it was enough. I was building a life with him, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. I was so busy looking at the sun that I never stopped to consider what it was costing me to grow in his shadow. The first time he mentioned Serafina was coming back, it was offhand. "Got an email from Sarah today. She's finishing her tour. Thinking of moving back." My heart, that foolish, hopeful flower, stuttered. "Oh, that's nice." "Yeah," he'd said, a distant look in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. "It is. I should have seen it then. The warning. The first frost." But I just tucked the blanket higher around him as he fell asleep on the couch, and went to water my plants, whispering to them, to myself, "It's enough. We are enough." I was a botanist. I of all people should have known you can't whisper a plant into thriving if the environment has become toxic. The change, when it came, was not a sudden storm but a gradual, chilling frost. Serafina didn't burst back into our lives. She insinuated herself, a delicate, creeping vine that slowly strangled the light from my world. She started showing up at the office. Just in the neighborhood, she'd trill, her voice like wind chimes. She was all willowy grace and effortless elegance, a stark contrast to my practical blazers and trousers stained with soil from my morning gardening. Where I was steady earth, she was air and fire. Kaylin, who had always been focused to the point of obsession, became distracted. Meetings ran long because he was having coffee with her. Emails went unanswered because he was helping her apartment hunt. My carefully curated schedules were suddenly dotted with lunch with Sarah and viewing Sarah's potential loft. Then the encroachment began. First it was small things. "Oh, Kaylin, darling, your tie is all wrong for this meeting. Let me." And she'd loosen the tie I'd knotted for him that very morning and redo it. He'd stand there, a passive, pleased smile on his face. Then she started taking over my duties. "I'll handle his calendar from now on, Elara," she announced one day, not even looking at me as she scrolled through her phone. "I have a better sense of the social obligations he needs to be making. You're more of a logistics person." I looked at Kaylin. He was staring at a spreadsheet. "Kaylin," I said. He waved a hand. "Whatever streamlines things, Elara. Sarah has great connections." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach, right next to the old, familiar ache from too many glasses of Baijiu. I was being demoted in my own life by a ghost who had suddenly become very, very real. The open mockery started soon after. In front of the entire team during a strategy session, Serafina laughed, a light tinkling sound. "Oh, Elara, that's such a sweet idea. Very grassroots. But Kaylin's company is beyond that now. We're playing with the big leagues." She'd pat my hand condescendingly. "Don't worry your pretty little head about it." Every time I looked to Kaylin for defense, for a flicker of the partnership we'd shared. It was never there. He'd either agree with her or remain silent, his gaze skipping over me as if I were a piece of furniture. The worst was the day of the Ether Innovations annual gala. This was my event. 4 years I had planned it down to the minute, from the floral arrangements, always my own designs using hardy, beautiful blooms that could last the evening, to the seating chart that was a delicate political minefield. This year Serafina took over. She called it elevating the brand. She replaced my simple, elegant centerpieces with towering, expensive orchids that looked cold and alien. She redid my seating chart, placing key investors next to vapid socialites because they were her friends. The night of the gala, I wore a simple emerald green dress. Serafina was in a breathtaking crimson gown, her arm permanently linked with Kaylin's. I hovered on the periphery, the ghost at my own feast. At one point I overheard her talking to a group of investors, pointing at the orchids. "Yes, I sourced them from a private greenhouse in Thailand. One has to have a vision, you know." Before it was all a bit rustic. Like a country wedding. One of the investors, Mr. Albright, who I'd personally nursed through a nasty hangover last year, chuckled. "Well, it's a definite upgrade, Serafina. Kaylin, you've got a gem here." Kaylin looked at her, and the pride in his eyes was a physical blow. It was a look he had never, ever given me. I had built the foundation of his success with my own hands, my own health, my own quiet, uncelebrated love, and she was getting the credit for putting a garland on the finished product. I felt a familiar, sharp twinge in my stomach. I slipped away, finding a quiet alcove near a balcony, pressing my hand against my abdomen, breathing slowly. This was the cost. This pain was the physical manifestation of every sacrifice, every ignored plea, every silenced piece of my soul. And for what? I heard their voices before I saw them. Kaylin and Serafina, stepping out onto the balcony just a few feet away. "She's just not on our level, Kay," Serafina was saying, her voice a confidential purr. "She's a wonderful girl, truly. But an assistant is an assistant. You've outgrown her. We've outgrown her." I held my breath, waiting for his defense. Waiting for him to say, "Elara is more than that. She's my rock." There was a long pause. The silence was colder than the night air. Then he spoke, his voice low and final. "I know." 2 words. They were the first frost that killed the last stubborn flower of my hope. I stood there in the shadows, the pain in my stomach eclipsed by a far greater, more profound agony cracking open in my chest. The soil of my devotion had frozen solid. And I knew with a terrifying clarity, that nothing would ever grow there again. The days after the gala were a study in quiet devastation. The world had taken on a gray, muffled quality, as if I were observing it from underwater. Kalen didn't mention the conversation on the balcony and I didn't bring it up. What was there to say? His silence on the matter was a confirmation louder than any words. I moved through my duties like an automaton. Pack his lunch. Sort his emails. Manage the logistics he and Serafina still deemed beneath them. The plants in our apartment began to wilt. I'd look at them, see their drooping leaves and feel a kinship so profound it was painful. I didn't have the energy to water them, to care for them. How could I nurture anything when I was so utterly parched myself? Serafina's presence became a constant, suffocating fog in the office. She had a new title now, Director of Brand Synergy. It was a meaningless phrase that essentially gave her carte blanche to interfere in every department, always with a sweet, condescending smile. The storm broke on a Tuesday. Kalen was finalizing a merger, the biggest deal of his career. The details were hyper-confidential. Only 3 people had access to the full financial projections: Kalen, our lead lawyer, and me. The documents were kept in an encrypted digital folder, the password to which was known only to us. I arrived at work to find the office buzzing with a tense, frantic energy. Kalen was in his glass-walled office, his face thunderous. Serafina was beside him, a hand on his arm, her expression one of grave concern. "Elara. My office. Now." Kalen's voice cut through the bullpen, sharp as a blade. My heart plummeted. I walked in, my legs feeling like lead. "Sit down," he commanded. I sat. "The projections for the Veritas merger," he said, his eyes boring into mine. "They've been leaked. A rival firm just made a preemptive bid, using our own numbers against us." The blood drained from my face. "What? How?" "That's what I'd like to know," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The access log shows your credentials were used to access the folder at 11:47 p.m. last night." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "That's impossible. I was home. I was asleep. You came home after me, you saw me." "I saw you on the couch," he said, his gaze cold and assessing. "I didn't watch you all night." The implication hung in the air, toxic and vile. "Kalen," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I would never. You know I would never." It was Serafina who spoke next, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Elara, we all know how stressed you've been lately. And maybe you felt a little left out? Unappreciated? It's understandable. But to sabotage Kalen's life's work, because you're upset with me?" She shook her head, her eyes wide with feigned sadness. "I never thought you'd go this far." The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. This was her masterstroke. She hadn't just wanted my role, she wanted me gone, disgraced, erased. "She's lying," I said, my eyes locked on Kalen's. I was begging him with every fiber of my being. "See me. See the woman who has loved you for years. See the truth. Kalen, you have to believe me. I have given you everything. My life. My health. Look at me. Do you truly believe I could do this to you?" He didn't look at me with love or with the memory of love. He looked at me as a CEO assessing a liability. His eyes were flat, devoid of any warmth or history. "The evidence is there, Elara," he said, his voice hollow. "Your credentials. The timing. And Sarah mentioned you've been acting strangely resentful." "Sarah mentioned?" I repeated, a hysterical laugh bubbling in my throat. I choked it down. "And you believe her? Just like that? After everything?" He didn't answer. His silence was the verdict. The pain in my stomach, my constant companion, flared into a white-hot inferno. But it was nothing compared to the shattering of my heart. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a desecration of our entire shared history. He was choosing to believe the worst of me, based on the word of a woman who had been back in his life for 5 minutes, over the woman who had stood by him for 5 years. I stood up, my body moving on autopilot. The world had narrowed to this single crystalline moment of agony. "I see," I said, my voice unnaturally calm. "So that's it. You've already tried and convicted me." "Elara," he began, but I held up a hand. "Don't." I looked at him, truly looked at him for the last time. I saw the boy I'd fallen in love with, buried deep beneath the ambitious, blinded man he had become. I saw the ghost of all our shared mornings, late nights, and whispered dreams. And I saw the grave he had just dug for them all. The trust between us, the foundation upon which I had built my entire world, was not just broken. It was annihilated. Without another word, I turned and walked out of his office. I walked past the pitying and suspicious stares of my colleagues. I walked out of the building that had been my second home. I walked away from the life I had built, the love I had nurtured, the man I had worshipped. The root of our relationship had been poisoned. And I knew with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating, that the only way to survive was to tear the whole plant out by the root. The apartment was silent when I returned. It felt like a museum dedicated to a life that had never truly been mine. The sleek furniture, the expensive art, all chosen by a designer. The only pieces of me were my wilting plants, their brown-tipped leaves a silent accusation. I felt numb, a hollowed-out shell. The seismic shock of Kalen's betrayal had temporarily anesthetized the pain. I moved with a methodical, detached precision. This wasn't a retreat, it was an evacuation. I went to the spare room I used as a potting shed and home office, the one space Kalen never entered. From the back of the closet I pulled out my old worn duffel bag. I didn't pack my designer dresses or the jewelry Kalen had given me. I packed my softest jeans, my warmest sweaters, my comfortable broken-in boots. I packed the few photos I had from the orphanage of Sister Agnes who had taught me to garden. I packed my trowel, my shears, and a carefully wrapped collection of seeds from my most cherished plants. Then I saw it. Tucked in my desk drawer, a simple leather-bound notebook. My Kalen book. For years I had jotted everything in it. His coffee order, his shoe size, the name of his childhood dog. Notes on investors. Mr. Davison, hates small talk, gets straight to numbers. Ms. Lee, ask about her daughter's violin recital. Reminders to myself. Pick up his dry cleaning. His left shoulder is sore from working out, remind him to ice it. He loves blackberry jam, not strawberry. It was a ledger of my devotion, a map of a love so meticulous it had erased the cartographer. I flipped through the pages and the numbness began to crack. Each notation was a tiny, painful pulse of a life spent in service to a man who could so easily believe me capable of treachery. A single hot tear splashed onto the page, smudging the ink. Then another. I sank to the floor, the sobs finally wrenching themselves free from the prison of my shock. I cried for the girl who believed love was earned through service. I cried for the years I had spent making myself small to fit into the margins of his life. I cried for the stomach pains, the lonely nights, the silenced opinions, the eroded self-worth. I cried until I was empty. And in that emptiness, a new feeling began to bloom. Not anger, not yet. It was a clear, cold resolve. I stood up, wiping my face. I took the Kalen book and placed it carefully on the kitchen counter, right next his espresso machine. Let him find it. Let him see the archaeology of my love. Let him understand exactly what he had thrown away. I took out my company laptop one last time. My fingers flew over the keyboard, steady and sure. To Kalen Vance. From Alaire Reed. Subject: Resignation. Tone. Effective immediately, I am resigning from my position as your assistant and from Ether Innovations. I will not defend myself against Serafina's accusations. The fact that you required a defense, that your faith in me could be so easily broken, is the only answer I need. For years I loved you. I built my world around you. I nurtured your dreams while neglecting my own. I confused devotion with love and service with partnership. I thought if I tended to you well enough, you would finally see me, not as a tool or a convenience, but as the woman who loved you. I was wrong. You have made your choice. You have given my role, the one I built with my own hands and heart, to a ghost from your past. So I am leaving you to it. Do not try to find me. Alaire. I hit send. The whoosh of the email leaving my outbox felt like the slamming of a colossal final door. I shouldered my duffel bag. It was surprisingly light. I took one last look around. At the dying plants. At the sterile perfection. At the book on the counter. My heart laid bare for a man who would probably just see it as a mess to be cleaned up. Then I walked out. I didn't leave a key. I didn't look back. I descended in the elevator, walked out of the building and hailed a taxi. Where to? The driver asked. I gave him the address of the bus station. I had no grand plan, only a direction. I had seen a brochure once for a place called Springview, a small town nestled in a valley known for its wildflowers and quiet pace. It was as good a place as any to disappear. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I looked out the window at the city skyline, the glittering tower that housed Ether Innovations shrinking in the distance. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel anger. I felt a vast, terrifying, and exhilarating emptiness. It was the feeling of a field after a fire, scorched and barren, but with the promise of rain on the horizon. For the first time in years, the future was a blank page. And it was mine and mine alone to write. Springview was more beautiful than the brochure had promised. It was a palette of soft greens and gentle blues, a world away from the city's harsh grays and aggressive neon. The air smelled of pine, damp earth, and blooming lilacs. The silence was a living thing, broken only by the chirping of birds and the distant rush of a river. I rented a small, slightly dilapidated cottage on the outskirts of town. It had a wild, overgrown garden that called to my soul. The estate agent apologized for the state of it, but I just smiled. It's perfect. For the first few weeks I did nothing but tend to that garden. I woke with the sun, my hands plunging into the cool, dark soil. I pulled weeds, pruned back aggressive brambles, and discovered forgotten perennials struggling for light. The physical labor was a balm. There was no ambiguity here. The soil responded to care. The plants reached for the sun I provided. It was a simple, honest transaction. The hollow ache in my chest began to fill, not with the memory of Kaylin, but with the scent of rosemary, the velvety softness of lamb's ear, the triumphant unfurling of a new fern frond. I started my seeds in trays on the windowsill, little promises of future beauty. The cottage itself was small and cozy. I painted the walls a warm cream and filled the rooms with simple second-hand furniture. I hung my few photos. I made a quilt for the bed. I learned to bake bread. The process of kneading the dough, watching it rise, was a meditation. I was building a home not for someone else but for myself. Every choice was mine. The people of Springview were kind but respectfully distant. The local grocer, an elderly man named Frank, always asked about my garden. The postmistress, Betty, saved seed catalogs for me. Slowly, tentatively, I began to belong. The idea for the guest house came to me as I stood in my now thriving garden, watching bees drone lazily among the lavender. The cottage had a separate, smaller structure out back, once a woodworking studio. It had good bones. And the main house had 2 spare bedrooms. I had some money saved. The salary Kaylin had paid me had been generous, and I had lived frugally, having no life of my own to spend it on. It was the money of my servitude, and now I would use it to build my freedom. It took a year of backbreaking work. I hired a local handyman, Tom, for the structural things, but I did most of the painting, sanding, and decorating myself. I named it the Sunstone Guest House, after the small yellow flowers that grew like cheerful weeds along the path to the door. The courtyard garden became my masterpiece, a riot of color and texture with winding stone paths, a small burbling fountain, and benches tucked away in private nooks. When I opened for business, it was with a quiet advertisement in the local paper and a simple website featuring my photos of the garden. My first guests were a retired couple on a bird-watching trip. They loved the peace, the beauty, the homemade scones I served for breakfast. One evening, after a long day of planting new rose bushes, I was sitting on my porch, a cup of tea in my hands, watching the fireflies dance over the flower beds. A profound sense of peace settled over me. It wasn't the frantic, desperate happiness I'd felt with Kaylin, which was always tinged with the fear of losing it. This was deeper. It was contentment. It was wholeness. I thought of Kaylin then for the first time in months. The memory was like a faded photograph, the emotions bleached out by time and sun. There was no sharp pain, only a distant, quiet pity for the woman I had been. The one who thought she needed to be needed in order to be loved. Here in this new earth I had tilled for myself, I was learning a different kind of love. The love of a morning's quiet ritual. The love of a job well done with my own 2 hands. The love of watching something I had planted with my own hope burst into glorious, independent bloom. I was no longer a sunflower straining towards a distant, consuming sun. I was the entire garden, the soil, the seed, the rain, and the sun all in one. I was complete. 2 years. The city hadn't changed, but Kaylin felt like a stranger walking through it. Ether Innovations was more successful than ever, a towering monument to his ambition. His penthouse was colder, emptier. The silence there was oppressive, not peaceful. He was sitting at his minimalist kitchen island, staring at a stack of financial reports, but the numbers swam before his eyes. All he could see was the empty space where Alara's plants used to be. He'd had a designer come in after she left to refresh the space. They'd filled it with expensive, sterile orchids. They died within a month. He hadn't replaced them. The merger with Veritas had gone through, but it had been a bloody, costly battle soured by the leak. He'd had to concede more than he wanted. The victory felt hollow. He and Serafina had gotten engaged in a whirlwind of publicity 6 months after Alara left. It was what everyone expected. She was the perfect corporate wife, beautiful, connected, ambitious. But the engagement ring felt like a shackle. Their arguments were frequent and vicious. She wanted a lavish, society wedding. He kept putting it off. She accused him of being emotionally absent. He was right. He found the book on a Tuesday. He was looking for a specific charger cable, rummaging through a drawer he never used, when his fingers brushed against worn leather. He pulled it out. Alara's notebook. His heart gave a single hard thud against his ribs. He opened it. Her neat, looping handwriting filled the pages. It was a chronicle of his life in her hand. Page 14. Kalen hates when his eggs are runny. Scrambled only well cooked. Page 32. Mr. Henderson's wife just passed away. Send white lilies, not a generic bouquet. Call him next Tuesday, he'll be alone. Page 55. His tells. Rubs his thumb and forefinger when he's lying. Adjusts his tie when he's nervous. A true smile reaches his eyes. Page 89. Reminder. His mother's anniversary of her remission is next week. He'll be quiet and withdrawn. Just be there. Page after page, a testament to a love so deep, so observant, so selfless, it shamed him. She hadn't just been his assistant. She had been the keeper of his soul. She had known him better than he knew himself. And he had accused her of betrayal. The memory of that day in his office crashed over him. The coldness in his voice. The flatness in his eyes as he looked at her. The way she had looked at him, not with anger but with a devastation so complete it had hollowed her out. He had done that. He had given her role, the one she had built with this meticulous, loving care, to Serafina. He gave my role to his FL. The words from her resignation email, which he had read 100 times, finally seared into his brain with their true meaning. It wasn't just about a job title. It was about her role in his life. The role of caretaker, of partner, of confidant. He had handed it to another woman, and then stood by while that woman systematically destroyed it. He froze. He had frozen out the one person who truly loved him. He had been so blinded by Serafina's glamour, so flattered by the rekindling of an old, easy fantasy, that he had allowed the real, solid, beautiful thing in front of him to be destroyed. Just then his phone buzzed. It was his head of security. Sir? You asked for an update on the Veritas leak. We finally traced the digital footprint. It wasn't Alara Reed's credentials. It was a spoofed IP, routed through a server in Switzerland. The access pattern matches. Well, it matches activity we've seen from Ms. Moreau's device. Serafina. The truth, cold and irrefutable, landed the final blow. Alara was innocent. Serafina had not only orchestrated the leak to sabotage him and frame Alara, but she had also been feeding information to a rival for months. He ended the call. The world tilted on its axis. He stumbled to the balcony, the book clutched in his hand, gulping in the cold night air. The scales fell from his eyes. He saw it all. Serafina manipulations, her greed, her superficiality. And he saw Alara's quiet strength, her unwavering loyalty, her profound, nurturing love that he had mistaken for weakness. He had traded a diamond for a piece of cut glass, and he hadn't realized it until he was left with nothing but the glittering, empty shards. He was freezing, but for the first time in 2 years he was beginning to thaw. The ice around his heart was cracking, and what was emerging was a pain so acute, so vast, it threatened to consume him. Regret. He had to find her. He had to beg her forgiveness. He had to tell her he was a fool. He had to make her see that he finally understood. He broke off his engagement with Serafina that night. It was an ugly, screaming match that ended with her throwing a vase at his head. He didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the name of a small town his private investigator had finally managed to trace Alara to after 2 years of dead ends. Springview. He was going to find his son. He just prayed he hadn't thrown her out of his sky forever. The bell above the door of the Sunstone guest house jingled, a soft, cheerful sound. I was in the middle of arranging a bouquet of dahlias and asters for the dining table, my hands covered in earth. I didn't look up immediately. "Welcome to the Sunstone. I'll be with you in just a moment," I called out, carefully snipping a stem. The silence from the doorway felt heavy, thick with a tension that was out of place in my peaceful courtyard. I finished placing the dahlia and finally looked up. And the world stopped. He stood there, framed by the doorway, the bright Springview sun casting his silhouette into shadow. But I would know that shape anywhere. The set of his shoulders, the line of his jaw. Killing. 2 years. They fell away in an instant, not as a gentle tide, but as a collapsing wall. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The familiar, phantom pain twisted in my stomach. My hands, still holding the shears, began to tremble. He looked older. There were new lines around his eyes, a gauntness to his cheeks that hadn't been there before. His expensive city suit was hopelessly out of place among the rustic wood and blooming flowers. He looked lost. And his eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that was almost frightening. It was a raw, hungry, desperate look I had never seen in them before. "Elara," he breathed, my name a prayer on his lips. I slowly placed the shears on the table, wiping my hands on my apron. I willed my heartbeat to slow, my breathing to steady. I was no longer the woman who fainted at his feet. I was the owner of this land. I was the keeper of this peace. "Kaylin," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "How did you find me?" He took a step forward, then another, as if drawn by an invisible string. His gaze swept over the guest house, the courtyard, taking in the climbing roses, the bubbling fountain, the simple, profound beauty of it all. It was so utterly alien to his world, and I saw the dawning, painful understanding in his eyes. "It took me a long time," he said, his voice rough. You disappeared completely." "That was the point," I replied evenly. He flinched. "Good. All right. I need to talk to you. Please." I considered him for a long moment. The part of me that had loved him so desperately wanted to hear him out, to fall into the familiar drama of us. But the larger, stronger part of me, the part that had built this life from the ground up, was wary. This was my sanctuary. He was an invader from a past I had worked hard to bury. "You have 5 minutes," I said, gesturing to a wrought iron bench in the courtyard. I did not sit beside him. I remained standing, leaning against the wooden porch post, putting a physical and symbolic distance between us. He sat, his posture defeated. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it. It was the most human I had seen him look in years. "I found the book," he began, his eyes fixed on the stone path. "Your book. About me." I said nothing. I read it. Every page. He looked up and his eyes were shining with unshed tears. The sight was so shocking it stole my breath. I had never seen Kaylin cry. "Elara, I am so sorry. I was a blind, arrogant fool. What I said to you, what I accused you of, it was the biggest mistake of my life." He told me everything. About the security report, about Serafina's treachery being proven. About their ugly breakup. He spoke in a rushed, frantic torrent, as if he had to get the words out before I stopped him. "She leaked the documents. She framed you. And I believed her. I believed her over you. I am so sorry." His voice broke on the last word. I listened. I absorbed his words. And I felt nothing. No vindication. No surge of righteous anger. It was just a fact. A confirmation of what I had known in my soul all along. "I know," I said quietly. He stared at me, confused by my lack of reaction. You know." "I knew I didn't do it, Kaylin. The truth of who I am was never in question for me. The only thing in question was your character. And you answered that question quite definitively 2 years ago." He looked as if I had struck him. He had come here expecting what? That his apology would be a key that would instantly unlock the past? That I would fall into his arms? "I love you, Elara," he said, the words bursting from him with a raw, desperate passion. "I think I always have. I was just too stupid and too caught up in an old fantasy to see it. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You are my foundation. Without you, everything is empty. It's all just noise." He stood up, taking a step towards me. I've called off the engagement. It's over with Serafina. It's always been you. Please. Come home. Forgive me. Give me another chance. I'll do anything. He was pleading. Kalen Vance, who never pleaded with anyone, was on the verge of begging. The man I had once loved more than life itself was offering me everything I had ever wanted from him. His love. His fidelity. His recognition. And as I looked at him, at the pain and hope in his beautiful familiar face, I felt a great sweeping wave of pity. Not love. Not longing. Pity. He had thawed. But I had already grown roots in new fertile ground. And I had no intention of being uprooted. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the cheerful chirping of sparrows in the birdhouse I'd hung in the old oak tree. Kalen's confession hung in the air, a grand dramatic gesture that felt as out of place here as his tailored suit. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the ghost of the boy I'd loved. But the man standing before me was a stranger. The love I'd felt for him was a relic, a pressed flower in a book, beautiful but long dead. Kalen, I said, my voice soft but unwavering. No. He blinked, stunned. What? No, I will not come home. No, I will not give you another chance. There is nothing to forgive. Nothing to forgive? He repeated, incredulous. After what I did to you. You didn't do anything to me, I corrected him gently. You revealed yourself to me. And that revelation was the most painful and ultimately, the most liberating gift you could have ever given me. I took a step away from the post, gesturing to the garden around us. You see all of this? I built this. With my own 2 hands. I planted every flower, laid every stone. This is my life, Kalen. It's messy and it's real and it's mine. The life I had with you, that was your life. I was just living in it, tending to it, hoping for scraps of your attention. I confused being needed with being loved. I was an accessory to your existence. He looked horrified. That's not true, Alara. You were everything. Was I? I asked, my tone not accusatory but curious. Then why was it so easy for you to discard me? Why did you never see me as a partner but as a possession? A very useful, devoted possession, but a possession nonetheless. You gave my role away, Kalen, because you never truly believed it was mine to begin with. It was a role you allowed me to play. I walked over to a climbing rose, its crimson blooms a splash of vibrant color against the white fence. I touched a velvety petal. You talk about emptiness. I remember that emptiness. It was the hollow ache in my stomach after drinking for you. It was the silence in our apartment when you worked late again. It was the space between us in our bed. I live with a different kind of quiet now. This one is full. It's filled with the satisfaction of a day's honest work, the peace of a sunset, the joy of a guest telling me my garden helped them heal. I turned back to him. You say you love me now. But I think you just love the memory of what I did for you. You love the idea of being forgiven. You've lost your convenient assistant and your dazzling fiancé, and you're scrambling to reclaim the one you think is easier to get back. But I'm not that woman anymore. Tears were streaming down his face now, openly. Alara, please. Don't say that. I love you. The me you love doesn't exist anymore, Kalen. She died in your office that day. And from her ashes I built this. I spread my arms, encompassing the guest house, the garden, the whole of my peaceful, self-made world. I am happier and more whole than I have ever been. I don't need you to complete me. I don't need to be your foundation. I am my own. He was crumbling before my eyes, the formidable Kalen Vance reduced to a shattered man in a flower courtyard. So that's it? It's over? After everything? It was over 2 years ago, I said, my finality as gentle as a falling petal. You just didn't know it yet. You need to go, Kalen. Your life is in the city. This isn't your world. He stood there for a long moment, frozen one last time, not by indecision, but by the devastating understanding that there was no fight to be had. The war was over and he had lost long before he even knew it was being waged. He nodded slowly, a broken, hollow movement. He turned and walked back through the courtyard, his shoulders slumped. He didn't look back. I watched him go, the man who had once been my entire universe, until he disappeared from view. The bell on the door jingled once more, signaling his exit. A deep, cleansing breath filled my lungs. The scent of roses, of earth, of home. There was no residual pain, no lingering doubt. There was only a profound, unshakable peace. I walked back to my half-finished bouquet. I picked up the shears, my hands now steady. I selected a sunflower, its golden face turned boldly towards the sky. It didn't need another sun to tell it where to grow. It found its own light. I placed it in the center of the arrangement, a bold statement of independence and joy. I was done waiting. I was done depending. I was like that sunflower, rooted in my own soil, reaching for my own sun, finally gloriously free. My own story was just beginning, and I was its main character, its author, and its happy ending, all on my own. The end.